The late spring of 1940 bore witness to a harrowing chapter in the annals of World War II, a chapter that unfolded on the windswept beaches of Dunkirk. May 26, 1940, marked a moment of desperation, courage, and ultimately a miraculous evacuation that would echo through the corridors of history as the miracle at Dunkirk. The picturesque town of Dunkirk, nestled onto the northern coast of France, became a crucible of despair for the Allied forces. Trapped between the relentless advance of the German army and the vast expanse of the English Channel, the British Expeditionary Force and remnants of the French and Belgian armies faced an existential threat. The evacuation of these beleaguered forces would become a symbol of resilience against overwhelming odds. As the German panzers closed in, the name of Adolf Hitler and the strategic brilliance of the German commanders, von Rundstedt and von Kleist, loomed large on the battlefield. The port city of Dunkirk, its streets and promenades echoing with the sounds of war, witnessed a desperate Allied defense against the encroaching darkness. The Battle of Dunkirk unfolded with ferocity, with the Germans seeking to annihilate the trapped Allied forces. The names of the beaches, Malo, Bray Dunes, Zuidkute, became synonymous with the impending disaster. The numbers of soldiers, their boots caked in sand and sea foam, trapped on the shrinking sliver of coastline, represented a microcosm of the larger catastrophe unfolding across Europe. In the British War Cabinet, the weight of decision rested on the shoulders of Winston Churchill, who grappled with the harsh reality that the fate of a significant portion of his army hung in the balance. The names of the military commanders, General Gort, Admiral Ramsay, and Air Chief Marshal Dowding, etched themselves into the urgent deliberations that unfolded in the smoke-filled rooms of wartime leadership. It was in this crucible of uncertainty that Operation Dynamo, the plan for the evacuation of Dunkirk, took shape. A flotilla of vessels, ranging from majestic destroyers to humble fishing boats, sailed across the treacherous waters of the English Channel. The names of these vessels, HMS Hood, HMS Basilisk, and the civilian-owned Sundowner, would become symbols of a collective determination to defy the odds. The skies above Dunkirk became a battleground between the Royal Air Force and the German Luftwaffe. The names of fighter pilots, Dowding's few, including Aldir, Robert Stanford Tuck, and Douglas Bader, soared into the pages of history as they engaged in dogfights to secure the skies for the evacuation below. As the evacuation unfolded, the beaches of Dunkirk transformed into a scene of chaos and salvation. The names of the civilian vessels, each manned by a determined crew willing to brave the perils of enemy fire, etched themselves into the saga of Dunkirk. The little ships, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, and lifeboats arrived at the shores, their skippers and crews becoming unsung heroes in a desperate bid to rescue stranded soldiers. The evacuation, though perilous, became a testament to the triumph of human spirit over adversity. The numbers of soldiers rescued, over 300,000 in total, defied the bleak forecasts that had suggested a much smaller evacuation. The beaches, strewn with abandoned equipment, echoed with the footsteps of those who made it onto the waiting vessels. The orchestration of the evacuation became a ballet of chaos and coordination. The names of the military leaders and civilian volunteers, Captain Tennant, Captain William Tennant, Admiral Ramsay, and Commander Charles Herbert Lightoller, became threads in a tapestry woven with courage and resourcefulness. On May 26, 1940, as the last ship departed Dunkirk, the world held its breath. The names of the soldiers left behind, sacrificing themselves to cover the evacuation, echoed in the silence of a retreating tide. The sacrifice of the French rearguard, who stood defiantly against the German onslaught, became a poignant chapter in the story of Dunkirk. The aftermath of Dunkirk left an indelible mark on the war's trajectory. The names of the evacuated soldiers, their faces etched with weariness and relief, became symbols of hope amid the dark clouds of war. The miracle at Dunkirk, while not a decisive military victory, became a strategic reprieve that allowed the Allies to fight another day. The evacuees, many of whom arrived on the shores of England with nothing but the clothes on their backs, became the living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The names of the regiments: Coldstream Guards, Royal Warwickshire Regiment, Lancashire Fusiliers, and the countless stories of individual courage emerged as beacons of inspiration in a world ensnared by conflict. May 26, 1940 would forever be etched in history as a day when Dunkirk, a town that witnessed both tragedy and triumph, became a beacon of hope. The names of the evacuated soldiers, the civilian vessels, and the military leaders became touchstones in the narrative of a war that demanded resilience, resourcefulness, and above all, the unwavering belief in the possibility of miracles, even in the darkest of hours. The so-called phony war ended decisively when Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands, Luxembourg and Belgium in a blitzkrieg, German for lightning war, attack. In the face of such a coordinated strategy, superior air power and highly mobile ground forces, supported by panzer tanks, all three countries would succumb quickly. The Germans occupied Luxembourg on May 10th, the Netherlands on May 14th, and Belgium by the end of the month. Soon after the blitzkrieg began, German forces invaded France, not along the Maginot Line, which the Allies had expected, but through the Ardennes forest, moving steadily along the Somme Valley towards the English Channel. As they advanced, German forces cut off all communication and transport between the northern and southern branches of Allied forces, pushing several 100,000 Allied troops in the north into an increasingly small sliver of the French coast. By May 19th, General John Gort, commander of the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, had begun to weigh the possibility of evacuating his entire force by sea in order to save them from certain annihilation by the approaching Nazi troops. Meanwhile, in London, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain had resigned under pressure on May 13th, making way for a new wartime coalition government headed by Winston Churchill. At first, British command opposed evacuation, and French forces wanted to hold out as well. But with the BEF and its allies forced back on the French port of Dunkirk, located on the shores of the North Sea, just 10.62 miles from the Belgian border, Churchill soon became convinced evacuation was the only option. In planning this risky operation, the Allies got a helping hand from a surprising source. Adolf Hitler, who on May 24th gave the order to halt the advance of German panzer divisions bearing down on Dunkirk. Hitler's decision has been attributed to his general's worries over a possible Allied counterattack, like the failed one on May 21st south of Arras, as well as Luftwaffe commander Hermann Göring's insistence that his air forces could prevent any evacuation attempt at Dunkirk. Hitler gave the tanks the go-ahead again on May 26th, but by that time the Allies had gained crucial time to put their preparations in place. On the evening of May 26th, the British began the evacuation from Dunkirk, using the codename Operation Dynamo. Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay directed the efforts, leading a team working out of a room deep inside the Dover cliffs that had once contained a generator known as a dynamo. giving the operation its name. The Luftwaffe's relentless bombing attacks on the harbour slowed the evacuation process, even as Royal Air Force RAF planes tried to delay or stop the German planes from reaching the beaches, losing many aircraft in the process. On the first full day, Operation Dynamo was only able to evacuate about 7,500 men from Dunkirk around 10 and got out the following day, May 28th. As Dunkirk had such a shallow beach, Royal Navy vessels couldn't reach it, and the Allies put out a call for smaller ships to carry troops from the shore to the larger ships further out in the North Sea. Some 800 to 1,200 boats, many of them leisure or fishing crafts, eventually aided in the evacuation from Dunkirk. Some were requisitioned by the Navy and crewed by naval personnel, while others were manned by their civilian owners and crew. The first members of this small armada, which would become known as the Little Ships, began arriving on the beaches of Dunkirk on the morning of May the 28th, helping to speed up the evacuation. At the outset, Churchill and the rest of British command expected that the evacuation from Dunkirk could rescue only around 45,000 men at most, but the success of Operation Dynamo exceeded all expectations. On May 29th, more than 7,000 British troops were rescued. More than 53,000, including the first French troops, made it out on May 5th. By the time the evacuations ended, some 198,000 British and 140,000 French troops would manage to get off the beaches at Dunkirk, a total of some 338,000 men. An additional 90,000 Allied forces were left behind, along with the bulk of the BEF's heavy guns and tanks, when the resistance ended on the morning of June 4th and German troops occupied Dunkirk. Founded in 1925, the Schutzstaffel, German for protective echelon, initially served as Nazi Party leader Adolf Hitler's 1889 to 1945 personal bodyguards, and later became one of the most powerful and feared organizations in all of Nazi Germany. Heinrich Himmler, 1900 to 1945, a fervent anti-Semite like Hitler, became head of the Schutzstaffel SS in 1929 and expanded the group's role and size. Recruits who had to prove none of their ancestors were Jewish received military training and were also taught they were the elite, not only of the Nazi Party, but of all humankind. By the start of World War II, 1939-45, the SS had more than 250,000 members and multiple subdivisions, engaged in activities ranging from intelligence operations to running Nazi concentration camps. At the post-war Nuremberg trials, the SS was deemed a criminal organization for its direct involvement in war crimes. Origins of the SS. In 1921, Adolf Hitler became the leader of a fledgling political organization called the National Socialist German Workers' Nazi Party. The group promoted extreme German nationalism and anti-Semitism and was dissatisfied with the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, the 1919 peace settlement that ended World War I 1914-18 and required numerous concessions and reparations from Germany. Hitler blamed Jews and Marxists for Germany's problems and espoused the concept of an Aryan master race. By the end of 1921, Hitler had his own private army, the Sturmabteilung, Assault Division, or SA, whose members were known as stormtroopers or brown shirts. for the color of their uniforms. The SA accompanied Hitler during his public appearances and surrounded him when he made impassioned speeches urging his supporters to perpetrate violence against Jews and his political adversaries. In 1925, Hitler ordered the formation of the Schutzstaffel, an entity that was separate from, although linked to, the SA. The SS initially consisted of 8 individuals, all of whom were entrusted to personally guard Hitler and other top Nazis. Julius Schreck, 1898-1936, a dedicated Hitler loyalist, became the first commander of the SS. The following year, Schreck, who frequently wore a fake mustache that resembled Hitler's, was replaced by Joseph Berchtold, and in 1897-1962. Erhard Haydn, 1901-33, took control of the SS in 1927. That same year, SS members were banned from partaking in political debate and were required to profess undying loyalty to Hitler and unquestioningly acknowledge him as their one and only prophet. Heinrich Himmler, architect of the SS. On January 6, 1929, Hitler named Heinrich Himmler commander of the SS, which at the time had close to 300 members. Himmler, who like Hitler was a fervent anti-Semite, had joined the Nazi Party in 1923 and eventually served as Hitler's deputy propaganda chief. Himmler was determined to separate the SS from the SA, transform the SS into an elite force that was larger and more potent than the SA, and finally, alter the function of the organization within the Nazi Party. Under Himmler's guidance, the SS evolved over the next 4 years into a first-rate paramilitary unit. To qualify for the SS, prospective members had to prove that none of their ancestors were Jewish and agree to marry only with the consent of their superior officers. In addition to receiving military training, recruits were taught that they were the elite not only of the Nazi Party, but of all humankind. Above all else, they were to value allegiance and obligation to the Nazi ideal, place individual concerns aside, and perform their duties diligently and as a cohesive unit. Such expectations were reflected in the SS motto, "Loyalty is my honor, consolidating power." By 1932, the SS had grown to include thousands of members, and the group began wearing all-black uniforms. When Hitler became Germany's Chancellor on January 30th, 1933, SS membership had increased to over 50,000. In March of that year, Himmler announced the opening of the first Nazi concentration camp in the town of Dachau, Germany. The camp initially housed political prisoners who opposed the Nazis. In April 1934, Himmler was named head of Germany's secret state police, the Geheime Staatspolizei, more commonly known as the Gestapo. The Gestapo, which had been established the previous year, was charged with tracking down and arresting Hitler's adversaries. Without benefit of trial, these alleged enemies either were executed or dispatched to concentration camps. At the same time, Himmler was one of the primary behind-the-scenes forces in the removal from power of Ernst Röhm, in 1887 to 1934, head of the SA. On June 30th, 1934, during a purge of major SA officials that came to be known as the Night of the Long Knives, Röhm was arrested. He was executed several days later. The elimination of Röhm further increased Himmler's profile within the Nazi hierarchy and partially led to him becoming one of the most powerful and feared men in all of Nazi Germany, expanding the SS mid-1930s. During the mid-1930s, 2 significant SS subdivisions came into existence. One was the SS Verfügungstruppen, or SSVT, a military unit whose members were quartered in barracks. In order to be accepted into the SSVT, recruits had to agree to a 4-year compulsory terms of service. The second subdivision was the Totenkopf Verbanze, or Death's Head Unit, whose members operated Hitler's concentration camps. The Totenkopf Verbände was so named because the caps worn by its members were decorated with an insignia that featured the image of a skull. World War II and the Waffen-SS at the outset of World War II 1939-45, by which time SS membership numbered more than 250,000, Himmler established the Waffen-SS, or Armed SS, essentially an expanded version of the SSVT. The Waffen-SS consisted of a cadre of combat troops who were involved with the mass shootings, anti-partisan warfare, and supplying guards for Nazi concentration camps. Some troops specialized in brutalizing and murdering individuals in territories occupied by the Nazis. They were also involved in the daily operation of Hitler's death camps. Within 6 months of its formation, Waffen-SS members numbered 150,000, according to some reports. Not all was German nationals. In 1940, Himmler proposed the recruitment of non-German citizens, and the Waffen-SS eventually included ethnic Germans who hailed from Hungary, Yugoslavia, Romania, and elsewhere, along with volunteers from practically every country the Nazis annexed, as well as Great Britain. For example, the Waffen-SS Charlemagne Division, formed in 1944, consisted of over 20,000 Frenchmen. As the war progressed, accounts differed as to the actual number of SS and Waffen-SS members. According to one report, by June 1944, 800,000 Nazis and Nazi supporters had been accepted into the SS and its subdivisions. Another account cited Waffen-SS membership alone at between 800,000 and 910,000 in October 1944. Himmler's fate in 1945, as the defeat of Nazi Germany seemed increasingly certain, Himmler became chief organizer of the Volkssturm, or People's Storm Troop, a unit whose members were the polar opposite of those who qualified for the SS. The Volkssturm consisted of a cobbled-together army of teenage boys and elderly men whose improbable task was to be the last line of resistance against the Allies. As Germany went down to defeat, Himmler was captured by Allied soldiers. He committed suicide on May 23rd, 1945, by ingesting a cyanide capsule. Following World War II, the Nuremberg military tribunals, in session from 1945 to 1949, were empowered to bring war criminals to justice. The tribunal declared the SS a criminal organization because of its direct involvement in committing war atrocities. When the men of the 42nd Rainbow Division rolled into the Bavarian town of Dachau at the tail end of World War II, they expected to find an abandoned training facility for Adolf Hitler's elite SS forces, or maybe a POW camp. What they discovered instead would be seared into their memories for as long as they lived. Piles of emaciated corpses, dozens of train cars filled with badly decomposed human remains, and perhaps most difficult to process, the thousands of walking skeletons who had managed to survive the horrors of Dachau, the Nazis' first and longest operating concentration camp. Almost none of the soldiers, from generals down to privates, had any concept of what a concentration camp really was, the kind of condition people would be in when they got there, and the level of slavery and oppression and atrocities that the Nazis had perpetrated, says John McManus, a professor of U.S. military history at the Missouri University of Science and Technology and author of Hell Before Their Very Eyes, U.S. Soldiers, liberate concentration camps in Germany. April 1945. It was stunning. The liberation of Dachau by American troops on April 29, 1945, wasn't the first such deliverance by Allied troops. The Soviets had found and freed what remained of Auschwitz and other death camps months earlier, but the wrenching images and first-hand testimonies recorded by Dachau's shocked liberators brought the horrors of the Holocaust home to America. When Dachau opened in 1933, the notorious Nazi war criminal Heinrich Himmler christened it the first concentration camp for political prisoners, and that's what Dachau was in its early years, a forced labor detention camp for those judged as enemies of the National Socialist Nazi Party. Trade unionists, communists, and democratic socialists at first, but eventually Roma, gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and of course, Jews. The cruelly efficient operation of Dachau was largely the brainchild of SS officer Theodor Eicke, who instituted a doctrine of dehumanization based on slave labor corporal punishment, flogging, withholding food, and summary executions of anyone who tried to escape. The Dachau prisoners labored under brutal conditions, tearing down a massive WWII-era munitions factory and then constructing the barracks and offices that would serve as the chief training ground for the SS. The prisoners even built their own protective custody camp, the euphemistically named concentration camp within the sprawling Dachau complex, composed of 32 squalid barracks surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence, a ditch, and 7 guard towers. Prisoners were subjected to medical experiments, including injections of malaria and tuberculosis, and the untold thousands that died from hard labor or torture were routinely burned in the on-site crematorium, forged into the iron gate separating the concentration camp from the rest of Dachau were the taunting words, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. Dachau was such a success for the Nazis that Eicke was promoted to Inspector General of all German concentration camps, for which Dachau became the model. After the events of Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, in which Jewish synagogues, businesses, and homes were destroyed by Nazi mobs across Germany, a greater and greater number of Jews were held at Dachau. On the eve of the American liberation of Dachau, there were 67 registered prisoners at the concentration camp, and roughly a third of them were Jewish. For the unwitting U.S. infantrymen who marched into Dachau in late April 1945, the first clue that something was terribly wrong was the smell. Some soldiers thought they were downwind from a chemical factory, while others compared the acrid odor to the sickening smell of feathers being burned off a plucked chicken. None of their prior combat experiences prepared them for what lay ahead. Weeks earlier, Nazi commanders at Buchenwald, another notorious German concentration camp, packed at least 3,000 prisoners into 40 train cars in order to hide them from the approaching Allied armies, and the train was supposed to arrive in Dachau a few days later. But the tortuous odyssey ended up lasting 3 weeks. All but a quarter of the train's 3,000 passengers died from starvation, dehydration, asphyxiation, and disease. The survivors were herded into the concentration camp, while thousands of fallen corpses were left to rot on the railway cars. If you're a U.S. soldier arriving at Dachau, you'd almost certainly see the death train first, says McManus. The abhorrent sights and smells of the death train left many American soldiers physically sick and emotionally shell-shocked, but it was only a taste of the horrors awaiting them inside the actual camp. In the weeks leading up to the liberation, the Nazis had shipped in prisoners from across Germany and as far away as Auschwitz. Like the survivors of the Buchenwald death train, these new arrivals were starving and riddled with diseases like typhus. The Dachau prison guards packed the new arrivals into the already overcrowded barracks, cramming up to 1,600 men into buildings designed for 250. Starvation and disease tore through the camp, claiming the lives of thousands of prisoners just days before the liberation. The Nazis tried to cremate as many of these bodies as they could before abandoning Dachau, but there were too many. Another 7,000 Dachau prisoners, mostly Jews, were sent on a death march to Tegernsee in the south, during which stragglers were shot and thousands of others died from exhaustion. When the American GIs entered the concentration camp, they found piles of naked corpses, their skin stretched tight across impossibly malnourished bodies. In interview after interview, the soldiers described the dead bodies being stacked like cordwood, a metaphor that unintentionally robbed the fallen prisoners of their remaining humanity. But for the soldiers to think of those bodies as fully human at that moment would have been too much to bear. Everywhere you turn is just this horror of bodies and people near death or in a state of complete decrepitude that you can't even process it, says McManus. When the American soldiers of the 45th Thunderbird Division stumbled upon the death train, it was like lighting a fuse that couldn't be snuffed out. The men of the 45th had been in combat for 500 days and thought they had witnessed every grisly atrocity that war could throw at them. But then there was this train filled with innocent bodies, their eyes and mouths open as if crying out for mercy. Many of the American soldiers broke down in sobs, others seethed with red-hot rage. When 4 German officers emerged from the woods, holding up a white handkerchief, Lieutenant William Walsh marched them into one of the boxcars, littered with corpses, and shot them with his pistol. When the mortally wounded Germans cried out in agony, other American GIs finished the job. Inside Dachau, it only got worse. An estimated 50 to 185 SS officers and assorted German military, including hospital personnel, were rounded up in a coal yard. Walsh called for a machine gun, rifles, and a Tommy gunner. When the soldiers began loading a belt of bullets into the machine gun, the German prisoners stood up and began to move toward their American captors. That's when Walsh allegedly took out his pistol and yelled, "Let them have it." After a 30-second flurry of gunfire, at least 17 German prisoners lay dead in the Dachau coal yard. I will tell you, as someone who has studied this in a great deal of depth, that this is pretty much the only time that American soldiers do this among many, many liberations in many places, says McManus. The separating factor is leadership, because you have a company commander who is so deeply upset at what he's seen that he just loses it. And when a leader loses it, soldiers are going to lose it too. Chief among the many traumatic experiences that awaited the liberators at Dachau was encountering the surviving prisoners, who numbered around 32,000. Walking skeletons was the only way to describe their condition of extreme malnourishment and illness. Ridden with typhus and lice, the overwhelmed prisoners grabbed at their liberators' uniforms in disbelief that their tortuous ordeal was finally over, unprepared and ignorant of how to care for people in such advanced stages of starvation. The soldiers pulled out their sea rations and Hershey bars and gave everything over to the skeletal prisoners, who gorged themselves on the food. Tragically, their digestive systems simply couldn't handle solid food. Decades later, some of these soldiers were racked with guilt over the revulsion they first felt when seeing the prisoners, and then for overfeeding them. says McManus. They were killing them with kindness. Further compounding the guilt was the fact that the American soldiers couldn't let the liberated prisoners actually leave Dachau. They had to be nursed to health first, which would take months, and then they would need a place to go. Tragically, some of the Jewish prisoners liberated from Dachau languished in displaced persons camps for years before being allowed to emigrate to places like the United States, the UK, and most of the American GIs who liberated Dachau only stayed for a few days before moving on to other missions. The care of the survivors was entrusted to combat medical units, while teams of engineers were charged with burying bodies and cleaning up the camp. Word of what happened at places like Dachau and Buchenwald spread quickly through the Allied ranks, and many soldiers and officers came to the concentration camps in the days and weeks following liberation to bear witness to the Nazi atrocities. Adolf Hitler committed suicide a day after Dachau was liberated, and German defeat was all but assured. But for many soldiers, seeing Dachau for themselves gave the war a new meaning. They weren't just fighting an enemy, they were fighting evil itself. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, along with Generals George Patton and Omar Bradley, visited the Order of Concentration Camp on April 12, 1945, a week after it was liberated. It was as if Eisenhower knew that the Nazi atrocities of the Holocaust would one day be dismissed as exaggerations or denied outright. "The things I saw beg a description," said Eisenhower. The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering as to leave me a bit sick. I made the visit deliberately in order to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things if ever in the future there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda. Hello and welcome to the History Deep Dive channel. In this video, we will listen to the most powerful and dominant voices dog the Third Reich, voices that once dominated the German airways during the Nazi regime throughout Europe during the Second World War. Voices that struck fear and caused the death of many millions throughout Germany and Europe as a whole. Starting with Adolf Hitler, the father of Germany and leader of the Nazi Party, in this clip we will hear Hitler in a calmer tone and demeanor compared to the crowd-arousing speeches we so regularly associate with him.
Und das Schönste ist es für mich, der ich weiß, dass dieses wunderbare Regiment des deutschen Volkes und unserer Bewegung meinen Namen trägt. Halt!
Minister of Propaganda for the German Third Reich under Adolf Hitler. A master orator and propagandist, he is generally accounted responsible for presenting a favorable image of the Nazi regime to the German people.
What does the new Germany think of economic developments in the States?
Wir betrachten die wirtschaftliche Entwicklung in Amerikas mit dem allergrößten positiven Interesse. Und wir sind dort der festen Überzeugung, dass Präsident Roosevelt und seine Berater auf dem richtigen Wege sind. Es handelt sich in der Tat um das größte wirtschaftliche und soziale Problem aller Zeiten. Die vielen Millionen Arbeitslosen, die ihre Plätze an den Maschinen und in den Kontoren verloren haben, wieder an ihre alten Arbeitsstellen zurückzuführen. Das kann nicht allein der privaten Initiative überlassen werden. Ausschlaggebend ist, dass die öffentliche Hand mit positiven Maßnahmen eingreift.
Dr. Goebbels says that people in Germany are keenly interested and follow very closely the economic development in the United States, and they believe that President Roosevelt and his advisors are on the right way, because here we are in fact concerned with the greatest economic problem, economic and social problem, which the world has ever had to solve, namely to reinstate in the process of production the millions of people who have lost their jobs in factories and shops and offices. And in order to solve this problem, it is not sufficient to leave it to private initiative, but the government must take the lead.
Hermann Göring, Luftwaffe Commander-in-Chief, is known for being one of the primary architects of the Third Reich Nazi police state as a German politician, military leader, and convicted war criminal. He was one of the most powerful figures in the Nazi Party. We hear him here at the Nuremberg trials, where he committed suicide in his cell.
The causes for taking people into what you call protective custody. That is right, isn't it? Das habe ich ganz klar beantwortet, aber ich bitte, dass diese Ausführungen, die soeben gehörten, zu der Beantwortung mit. And your counsel will see to that. Unter den damaligen Umständen war sie nach meiner Auffassung die einzig mögliche Form und sie hat auch gezeigt, dass Deutschland aus seinem tiefen Elend der Verarmung und Arbeitslosigkeit in kurzer Zeit zu einer verhältnismäßigen Blüte wieder gekommen war.
Heinrich Himmler was the Reich leader, Reichsführer of the dreaded SS of the Nazi Party from 1929 until 1945. Himmler presided over a vast ideological and bureaucratic empire that defined him for many, both inside and outside the Third Reich, as the second most powerful man after Adolf Hitler.
Ein ganz schweres Kapitel will ich hier vor Ihnen in aller Offenheit nennen. Es soll zwischen uns ausgesprochen sein, und trotzdem werden wir nicht in der Öffentlichkeit nie darüber reden. Genauso wenig, wie wir am 30. Juni gezögert haben, die befohlene Pflicht zu tun und Kameraden, die sich verfehlt hatten, an die Wand zu stellen und zu erschießen. Wie wir darüber niemals gesprochen haben und sprechen werden. Das war so eine, Gott sei Dank, in uns wohnende Takt, Selbstverständlichkeit des Taktes, dass wir uns untereinander nie darüber unterhalten haben, nie darüber sprachen. Es hat jeden geschauert und jeder war sich klar, dass es das nächste Mal wieder tun würde, wenn es befohlen wird und wenn es notwendig ist. Ich meine die Judenevakuierung, die Ausrottung des jüdischen Volkes.
Rudolf Hess was a long-standing personal aide to Adolf Hitler and deputy party leader of the Nazi Party until 1941.
Vorzubeugen, dass ich für verhandlungsunfähig erklärt werde, gebe ich dem Gericht nachfolgende Erklärung ab. Die Gründe für das Vortäuschen von Gedächtnisverlust sind taktischer Art.
Albert Speer, 1905 to 1981, was a trained architect. After joining the Nazi Party in 1930, Speer became Adolf Hitler's personal architect. In 1942, he was named Minister of Armaments and Munitions, assuming significant responsibility for the German war economy.
Und der Zusammenbruch seines Systems haben eine ungeheure Leidenszeit über das deutsche Volk gebracht. Die nutzlose Fortsetzung dieses Krieges und die unnötigen Zerstörungen erschweren den Wiederaufbau.
Joachim von Ribbentrop was Foreign Minister of Germany. He played the key role in negotiating the German-Soviet non-aggression pact that made possible the German invasion of Poland in September 1939.
Es ist möglich geworden durch die großzügige, weit vorausschauende Einstellung des deutschen Reichskanzlers. Es ist der erste praktische Schritt seit Jahren auf dem Wege zu einer Rüstungsbegrenzung und zu einer allgemeinen Befriedung in Europa.
Baldur Benedikt von Schirach was a German politician who served as head of the Hitler Youth.
Alle Jugend dem Führer. Das ist die Parole der HJ. Und wie in den vergangenen Jahren rufen wir auch heute den Jahrgang der Zehnjährigen.
Benito Mussolini was an Italian political leader who became the fascist dictator of Italy from 1925 to 1945. Originally a revolutionary socialist and a newspaper journalist and editor, he forged Italy's violent paramilitary fascist movement in 1919 and declared himself Prime Minister.
I am very glad to be able to express my friendly feelings towards the American nation. Friendship with which Italy looks at the millions of citizens who from Alaska to Florida, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, live in the United States, is today deeply rooted in our hearts. This feeling, created by mutual interests, so contributed to the preparation of an ever brighter era in the life of both nations. I grieve the wonderful energy of the American people, and I see and recognize among you sons of your land as well as ours, my fellow citizens, who are working to make America great. I salute the great American people. I salute the Italians of America, who unite in a single love our two nations.
In the early days of April 1940, as the European continent still echoed with the distant rumblings of war, a sudden and audacious move by the German army cast a shadow over the serene landscapes of Denmark and Norway. April 9th, 1940, became a day etched in the annals of World War II as the Wehrmacht, under the command of Adolf Hitler, launched swift and coordinated invasion that would alter the course of the conflict and plunge Scandinavia into the crucible of war. The unsuspecting nations of Denmark and Norway awoke to the ominous sound of German boots trampling across their soil. The strategic imperative behind the invasion was clear. The Germans sought to secure vital sea routes and establish a foothold in the North Atlantic, safeguarding access to crucial resources. The names of the cities and towns where the invasion unfolded, Copenhagen, Oslo, Bergen, became synonymous with the sudden upheaval that swept across the tranquil landscapes. The invasion of Denmark was a swift and virtually unopposed affair. German forces, utilizing a combination of airborne and amphibious tactics, seized key objectives with a precision that left the Danish defenses reeling. King Christian Wait, facing an overwhelming force, reluctantly acquiesced to the German demands to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Denmark, a nation caught in the crossfire of larger geopolitical ambitions, succumbed to the inexorable advance of the German war machine. In Norway, the invasion unfolded with a different cadence. German paratroopers, dropping from the skies in daring airborne assaults, targeted strategic locations with the precision of a well-choreographed ballet. The names of the fjords, Narvik, Trondheim, Kristiansand, became battlegrounds where the Norwegian defenders, though outnumbered and outgunned, displayed tenacity and courage in the face of an unexpected onslaught. As the Norwegian coastal cities faced the brunt of the German offensive, the Allies, caught off guard by the audacity of the move, scrambled to respond. The British and French forces, deploying troops to support Norway, found themselves in a race against time. The harsh and unforgiving terrain of Norway, with its icy fjords and snow-capped mountains, became a formidable adversary in addition to the German invaders. The Battle of Narvik, a pivotal engagement in the early stages of the Norwegian campaign, saw fierce fighting between German and Allied forces. The strategic importance of the port city, nestled at the crossroads of vital sea routes, became a focal point where the aspirations of the Axis powers clashed with the desperate defense mounted by the Allies. The numbers of soldiers who perished in the icy landscapes of Narvik underscored the brutality of a conflict that unfolded in the pristine beauty of Norway's natural vistas. The Norwegian royal family, symbolizing the resilience of the nation, faced the trials of war with stoic resolve. King Haakon VII, Queen Maud, and Crown Prince Olav became symbols of national unity as they resisted the German occupation. Their flight to safety and subsequent exile in London cast a poignant shadow over a nation grappling with the harsh realities of occupation. In the weeks that followed, as the German forces consolidated their control over Denmark and Norway, the world watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. The invasion, though strategically sound from a military perspective, carried profound implications for the course of the war. The names of the generals, von Falkenhorst, von Bottischer, and the locations of the German High Command's deliberations in Berlin became waypoints in the unfolding narrative of global conflict. The occupation of Norway, however, did not quell the flames of resistance. The Norwegian people, inspired by the example set by their royal family and fueled by an indomitable spirit, began a clandestine struggle against the occupiers. The names of the resistance fighters, Max Manus, Gunnar Sundsteby, became legendary as they waged a guerrilla war against the German forces. As the war raged on and the occupation persisted, the fate of Denmark and Norway became a microcosm of the larger conflagration that engulfed the world. The Norwegian merchant fleet, crucial for the transportation of vital resources, faced the perils of German U-boats and naval blockades. The Danish people, though initially spared the worst of the occupation, grappled with the moral complexities of collaboration and resistance. The invasion of Denmark and Norway, though overshadowed by larger conflicts on the eastern and western fronts, held a unique place in the tapestry of World War II. The swift and audacious move by the German army set in motion a chain of events that would shape the destinies of nations and individuals alike. The names of the cities and fjords, the faces of the resistance fighters, and the decisions made by leaders in the corridors of power became integral threads in the intricate narrative of a war that spared no corner of the globe. On April 9, 1940, German warships enter major Norwegian ports from Narvik to Oslo, deploying thousands of German troops and occupying Norway. At the same time, German forces occupied Copenhagen, among other Danish cities. German forces were able to slip through the mines Britain had laid around Norwegian ports because local garrisons were ordered to allow the Germans to land unopposed. The order came from a Norwegian commander loyal to Norway's pro-fascist former Foreign Minister Vidkun Quisling. Hours after the invasion, the German minister in Oslo demanded Norway's surrender. The Norwegian government refused, and the Germans responded with a parachute invasion and the establishment of a puppet regime led by Quisling, whose name would become a synonym for traitor. Norwegian forces refused to accept German rule in the guise of a Quisling government and continued to fight alongside British troops. But an accelerating German offensive in France led Britain to transfer thousands of soldiers from Norway to France, resulting ultimately in a German victory. In Denmark, King Christian X convinced his army could not fight off a German invasion surrendered almost immediately. Hitler now added a second and third conquered nation to his quarry, which began with Poland.